every time that you take something that is used against you and you make it into your own armor, it loses its power to hurt you.
Welcome to HIV The Morning After. I'm Dan Hall. I'm a documentary producer and director. I've spent my entire adult life watching ignorance and prejudice play out around HIV. And frankly, I'm tired of it. And I'm sure many of you are too. This podcast is an attempt to do something about that. Not through lectures or statistics, but by doing what I do best. Interviewing people and letting them tell their own stories. Real voices, lived experiences, no bullshit. These conversations matter, and if you think so too, please rate, review, and share HIV The Morning After. I can make these episodes, but I can't make people listen to them or find them on their algorithms. That bit's down to you. You can reach me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. Right then, let's get started. Today I'm speaking with Matthew Hodson. Matthew is one of Britain's most influential and enduring figures in HIV and LGBTQ+ activism. A man who has lived openly and, in his own powerful words, shamelessly with HIV for many years. Matthew's career has been dedicated to fighting stigma and championing the rights and health of people affected by HIV. His journey offers a profound insight into the evolution of the epidemic, the fight for LGBTQ+ rights, and the power of living one's truth as an act of defiance and change. Matthew, welcome to HIV The Morning After.
Hello.
So before we get into your story in depth, tell us a bit about yourself now.
I'm just that middle-aged gay man who loves Stephen Sondheim and musical theatre and Marvel films and Jodie Foster.
Now, Matthew, you came out as gay in the 1980s. What was that like?
So I was 15, I think, when I first kind of said to anyone that I was bisexual, because I said bisexual first. And that was to my girlfriend at the time, who had also just told me that she was bisexual. And I was like, yeah, me too. And she said, well, have you done anything about it? And I was like, no, but I will. And so then I decided that I needed to do something about this bisexuality, which I had now spoken about. So I took myself off to Heaven, the nightclub in London. And I met someone, went back to their hotel, and rid myself of my gay virginity, which hadn't been a huge challenge. The guy that I met that night was American, and that was in 1983, and it was the same year that they first broadcast a documentary about AIDS on British television. So I had just had sex with an American man. And then I sat down and I watched this documentary called A Killer in the Village, which was the first British HIV documentary. And it said, this is, so far it's confined to gay men, particularly in America. And I was like, oh, well, I've just had sex with an American. So for those first couple of years, I was really terrified. I had just kind of put that to the back of my mind. I didn't think that I was HIV positive at the time, and I wasn't. I did test negative after that when tests became available. Then, I had my first boyfriend when I was about 17, although that was very, very secret. We were in a friendship circle, but nobody else in that friendship circle knew that we were actually dating.
And why did you keep it secret from your friendship group?
I mean, he didn't want people to know. I would have gladly trumpeted it. I'd have been very happy for them all to know. And then when that ended, it broke my heart. And I think that's when I told my mum. And the first thing she said to me was, well, I expect you'll get AIDS and die then.
And how did that make you feel, that conversation?
Quite angry, to be honest. I was said, I was heartbroken and feeling a bit sorry for myself. And it would have been nice to have had someone kind of say, I love you, or that's fine, or how can I help, or something. But she was scared.
The 80s was an incredible decade of activism. It really was. It's one of the key memories I have of the decade is protests, marches, desires for change. Can you tell us about your immersion in activism and what tipped you over from just agreeing with articles to thinking, do you know what, I'm going to go and stand in the rain and change things?
Well, I went to university. And I think university was when I kind of really feel like I properly came out. As in, I came out to everyone. As in, I would wear, badges that kind of announce that I was gay. Pink triangles, which was kind of the big symbol of being gay back then. And it was Section 28 that kind of really pushed me out of the closet. There's that weird thing that lots of people say that, they were forced into the closet by Section 28. I felt like I was forced out of the closet by Section 28.
Can you just tell us what your understanding of Section 28 is?
So Section 28 was an amendment to the Local Government Act, which banned the promotion of homosexuality. It was kind of meant to be about schools, about education, but Conservative government had already actually ensured that sex education in schools wasn't a local government, wasn't under local government command. So it didn't actually legally, technically hit the target that it was meant to. But I think what was terrifying about Section 28 was it was the first piece of homophobic legislation that had been introduced for many years, because we had a lot of historic homophobic legislation, a lot of legalized inequality, but that had been around, for decades. And this was a new piece of homophobic legislation. Before AIDS and before Section 28, homophobia was on the decrease, but the peak of homophobia was 1986, 1987. That was when, as far as records show, that was when homophobia was at its highest, and that was 75% of people believing that homosexuality was always or almost always wrong.
So you didn't sit in front of a computer with hashtags and sign online petitions. You actually got out there.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd have to say, back then we didn't have computers. So I think maybe if I'd had the option of sitting behind a computer and, writing snarky things online, perhaps I would have done that. But we had no choice. If you wanted to protest, you had to show up. And we weren't in the mainstream press, the Guardian or, kind of the sympathetic or more sympathetic papers. They didn't cover gay issues at all. So that was part of why protest was essential to our armory, because we had to do things that would get attention. Because if we didn't get that attention, if we didn't do the kiss in or the die in or whatever, then no one would care. No one would know about it. So I mean, I went on kind of anti-Section 28 protests in Leeds and in Manchester and in London, and then. There was the night that I got arrested because the level of homophobia in the tabloid press was extraordinary. I mean, you'd regularly see kind of people saying, the gays should be rounded up. They should be all sent to the Isle of Wight, and the Isle of Wight should become like a prison colony for homosexuals. Which, I mean, actually the idea of tons of homosexuals on an island isn't entirely unappealing, but make it somewhere warmer perhaps than the Isle of Wight, and we might have volunteered. Yeah. So me and some friends, we decided we were going to gay up Fleet Street, which was where the tabloid press was kind of mainly located at the time, and we went down Fleet Street with pink paint and daubed pink triangles everywhere. I'm not necessarily defending it as the most mature action I've ever been involved in, but I think we felt a sense of rage and frustration.
What did these early experiences teach you about the power of community and direct action?
So I mentioned that there was a march in Manchester. I mean, there was a march in Leeds as well, but the march in Manchester was something that was really special. But that was the largest ever gay rights protest gathering anywhere in the world. Those days, prior to you'd have 5,000, 7,000 people, something like that. And they would all march. There would be no one lining the streets. The only people lining the streets would be shoppers who would be a bit pissed off that they weren't able to cross the road easily. But Manchester, suddenly, it was a turning point. People talk about Stonewall like a turning point, but for me, I think Manchester was a bit of a turning point because it was when gays showed up in numbers like we'd never seen before. And that following Pride, we saw, again, 20,000 people or something like that. And then those numbers increased at successive Prides. And it's so important to be visible because when people know that they have a queer person in their family or in their workplace or in their church, it becomes really hard to hate that person.
So we're in the mid-1990s now, and you are suspecting that you may be living with HIV, and yet you decide to not go for a test. Why is that?
I mean, in the early 90s, I was dating a guy who lived with HIV. We were together for almost 3 years, and it was a very intense relationship. We were engaged, in inverted commas. Obviously, gay people didn't have the right to marry at that point, but we had an intention that we would have some kind of ceremony in front of our friends, which would kind of, be a marriage of sorts. And there was an urgency to that love because he had HIV, and at the time there was no effective treatment, and the expectation was that he would die. We both had that expectation, and then it ended. And like lots of relationships, it didn't end very well, and I was very unhappy.
Just to be clear, the relationship ended. It didn't end because he died.
No, he is. As far as I know, he is still alive. I hope that he is. I wish him only happiness. But when that relationship ended, I was in a really bad place emotionally. I was a bit self-destructive. I was drinking a lot, and I was occasionally taking drugs, and I just didn't really value my life. And so although it wasn't like I was trying to acquire HIV, I certainly wasn't doing that. I was still using condoms. But there were times when I didn't use condoms, when I just couldn't care. And I thought, if someone told me that I was HIV positive now, I think I would just kill myself. And that's why I didn't test, because there was no effective treatment. So I thought, how is my life better if I know? And I just didn't think that it would be.
Then in 1996, the Vancouver International AIDS Conference happens. Why is it significant?
Oh, changed everything. That was when the scientists said, we can treat HIV. There had been tons of previous attempts. AZT very famously had actually, had been kind of touted as this, kind of this great miracle cure, and then it was so toxic that people were dying as a result of taking AZT rather than dying of AIDS. And all these other times when we'd had hope and then it had been crushed. And then they said, no, this combination therapy means that we can keep AIDS at bay. as that kind of news got out, and as I actually saw friends of mine start to take the treatment and start to get better, I was like, okay, this is something that works. And it's really inspiring. If you look at kind of figures around AIDS mortality, from 1996, that figure just changes. And it changes in highly developed Western countries, high income countries first. It was very slow to actually reach people in sub-Saharan Africa, which obviously has one of the densest HIV epidemics globally. But it is still wonderful to see those graphs and see how AIDS deaths, which had just been climbing and climbing and climbing for years, started dropping dramatically.
And you decide to test. Tell us about that day.
It was overdue. I knew that there was at least a possibility that I had HIV. So I did go with a friend. I got a friend to go with me. It was a one-day test, but back then it wasn't instant. It was like you took the test and then you had to wait about 4 hours or something like that. As I took the test, I remember the person who took the blood saying to me, "You've been in a long-term relationship with someone who has HIV, and you have also had inconsistent condom use in your sex life subsequently. You meet the profile of someone who will test positive." I think really now we've got on board with how to speak to people in sexual health clinics in a way which doesn't imply any judgment. I think they were still learning that at that point. I felt a bit like I was being judged for my sexual behavior. So I took the test. I went to see a Woody Allen film with my mate. When they told me I was HIV positive, they said, the results are back, and we're sorry to tell you that you are HIV positive. And I was told, in a very cheerful, "You've got about 20 years to live." I remember those words, and they just echoed in my head for days and days afterwards. I would sit on the London Underground, and all I could hear was those words, and I thought that other people, the people sitting opposite me on the carriage, could hear them too. I thought everyone was looking at me, thinking, there's a guy with HIV.
And how did you feel getting that result? Because although we are in a period where combination therapy is permeating, and as you said, you're seeing the HIV numbers come down, you had also witnessed at least a dozen of your friends who had died.
20 years was such a luxury compared to my friends who had died. So, I couldn't resent that. And, when you're 30, 50 feels like a long way away. But it did profoundly change my life, because I then felt you've got a limited period to get things done now. What do you want to do with these precious years?
And did you tell other people?
I told a couple of my closest friends. My best friend was actually living abroad at the time, and I emailed him. And this was actually still in the fairly early days of email, and fortunately he picked it up straight away and replied and said, "Do you realize you've CC'd this woman who was a colleague of mine?" I had no idea how that had happened. But I was terrified of all my work colleagues knowing about it. And so, I kind of ran down the corridor and just said to this woman, "Please, I've just sent you an email by mistake. Please, please, please delete it without reading it." Because I really couldn't cope with the thought that people would know.
So from these experiences, you could clearly identify quickly the pernicious link between HIV stigma and homophobia.
Oh, but I think it goes back, to the days when I was doing outrage or doing other protests. Homophobia and HIV stigma have always been interwoven. And well, I mean, it's not just homophobia; it's also racism. It's also prejudice against sex workers and discrimination against people who inject drugs. It's this curious fact that HIV has always affected those communities within society, particularly within Western society. It's the most marginalized communities that have been affected. And that, I mean, who knows where we would be in terms of treatment or vaccines or cures if this affected other groups. But absolutely for sure, if HIV most affected white, cis, straight men, we wouldn't be talking about HIV stigma now. There never would have been any HIV stigma if it was something that only affected those groups.
So in 1999, you join GMFA, Gay Men Fighting AIDS, as a project worker. Why did you choose them? Or is it just they were the people who said yes to your CV?
I think there was something about Gay Men Fighting AIDS which really appealed to me, because I had kind of come up through gay activism. And I think I was always more involved in gay or LGBTQ rights than I was involved particularly with the HIV struggle, although I thought they were indivisible. But Gay Men Fighting AIDS put gay men at its heart. And I felt that was where we needed to be in terms of looking at HIV prevention and supporting people living with HIV. I remember when I was at university, there was Health Education Authority HIV advertising, and they did one for kind of gay men, and it was two kind of rather Abercrombie and Fitch models looking at each other in black and white in a kind of very Calvin Klein ad way, and the headline was, "We don't have safer sex just because it's safer." It just was kind of a nonsensical thing, which it felt to me like surely no one who's had anal sex would ever say that. So this is clearly copy that has been written by some straight guy who has no idea what gay sex is about or why we value gay sex and why our intimacy is important to us. Gay Men Fighting AIDS, it felt like they were the ones who were saying, yeah, actually, gay sex, good. We like it. We enjoy it.
And I remember being very impressed by the sex positive leafleting and artwork, just everything. I thought it was a fantastic organization. And the graphics and everything was so sex positive.
Yeah, it was because it was a bunch of gay men writing material for gay men or producing material for gay men. We talk to gay men in the same way as we talk to our friends. That was the kind of the ethos behind everything that we were doing. So that's why we use fuck rather than sexual intercourse, because that's the language we used with each other. And people thought that was shocking and disgraceful, but also we were happy if people were talking about it. Talking was the good thing.
And then you rose through the ranks of GMFA and became chief executive in 2013. What for you were the primary challenges and objectives for GMFA during this tenure?
Well, I mean, as chief executive, it all becomes about securing income. So that's the not very fun bit of it. But I think there was a kind of a more fundamental battle that we were engaged with, which was about ensuring that people, gay men was our specific remit, but people had choices around their sexual health. Gay Men Fighting AIDS was was the first, I think globally, was the first health organization to really start talking about viral load, because that had been a bit of a secret that was known about by medical professionals, but they didn't share that information with people who were at risk of acquiring HIV. Because we knew from quite early on, when people started being treated, populations that had high levels of treatment had low levels of transmission. So we started talking about that. And there was a lot of kickback against this. People said, no, there can only ever be one HIV prevention message, and that is use a condom every time. And, condoms are great, fabulous. And if people are really happy to use condoms, I'm so happy for them. But that use a condom every time message hadn't worked.
But it just wasn't real. It just was it was a sort of advertising ideology that did not exist in the real world. It just meant nothing.
Yeah. But people were convinced that you couldn't confuse the message. It's like, oh, well, that's why people aren't using condoms, because you've given them an option. It's like, well, no, the people who we're giving options to weren't using condoms anyway. And we could see that from the figures of people who were acquiring HIV. So there was never a point where everyone used condoms. There's a myth that there was this moment, but it never happened. We knew people who died of AIDS in huge numbers. I wish I could say, oh, if you knew someone who died of AIDS, you always used a condom, but that wasn't true. People are people.
People want intimacy.
People want intimacy, and it's more than just that. I mean, there's a million reasons why someone may not use a condom on a particular occasion. And it may be about intimacy. It may be about love. It may be about speed. It may be about, oh, I haven't got a condom on me. It may be about, if I ask him to use a condom, maybe he'll turn me down for sex and I really, really want to have sex with him. It may be, I'm drunk, I don't care. There's a million reasons.
There's as many reasons as there are beautiful faces to kiss.
Oh, I love that.
Your own personal treatment journey has seen you navigate changes to protocols, switching regimes. I think it's easy with hindsight to look back on these changes and just see them as oh, and it's the next stage. But I imagine there must be inherent discomfort and fears that come every time there is a change in protocol or a change in meds. Is there?
When I was diagnosed with HIV, as I said, they told me I had 20 years. But also the anticipation was that any drugs that I would start would be quite toxic and, could have, very visible signifiers. People, would develop, body fat distribution would change, so that people would develop buffalo humps, for example, or they would have facial wasting. And I remember kind of in early discussions around treatment, saying to my doctor, well, I'd rather have something that was less effective, but was going to be less visible. Because I kind of felt like the quality of my life was dependent on not having too much of those side effects.
Now, you said, I think genuinely, really powerfully, that you lived shamelessly with HIV. And there was another lovely quote of yours that I found. All of my fear and shame, my self-stigmatizing, has been washed away. How did you do that? Can you tell us so a lot of the people listening can learn?
Well, I mean, a lot of it goes back to coming out to my mum and her saying, well, I expect you'll get AIDS and die then. And I think for my early gay life, I was like, well, as long as I don't get HIV, then I haven't done the very bad thing which my mother warned me about, which my mother expected of me. And then when I did get diagnosed with HIV, I had that enormous sense that I had fulfilled her worst expectations, that I was a complete failure as a child and as a human being. I didn't really realize quite how heavy a burden that was. I couldn't tell my parents that I was living with HIV. I mean, as I said, I told my close friends, but I decided that I wasn't going to tell my family. And I think a large part of that was that enormous sense of shame. And then my mum found out. And my mum found out cruelly. A journalist told her that I was living with HIV. She hadn't known. And I hadn't actually told the journalist I was living with HIV. I'd allowed the journalist to have my mum's number for another reason. And she decided, this journalist, that she wanted to know what the mum's response would be, and told her.
Good Lord.
Yeah. It was terrible. It was so... My mum was destroyed by it. And our relationship was, really damaged. She was so hurt that I hadn't told her. But at the same time, she was so angry about it, and mean and cruel, that it only made me feel that I had been right not to tell her, because she did everything that I had most feared she would.
Which was what?
She just really blamed me. And it got to a point where I even said to my father, I don't think I want to see her anymore. And my father said, I understand. But the good that came out of it was that once my family knew, then I had no reason not to tell people. I wrote an article, pressed send, and that moment I pressed send, it was like, well, it's like jumping off a high board. I've done it now. I can't take it back. Now let's just make sure I enter the water with grace.
And what year was this?
Well, so this was 2012, 13 years ago.
The year of the London Olympics.
Yes, well, that's how I can remember it, because actually the article which I wrote about being open about my HIV status, I can't remember exactly how I did it, but I did tie it into the London Olympics somehow. So I always remembered that was the year. But the more I talked about living with HIV, and the more I kind of talked about it in a way which wasn't, oh, I've got something sad to say, but actually, oh, I've got something to say. The more I realized I'd been carrying this secret as a burden, and that it had slowed me down, that it had meant that I was guarding myself, that I was watching myself, because this was this terrible thing. And as soon as I said, well, maybe it's not terrible, maybe it's okay, maybe it's fine, maybe it's not something I need to apologize or feel embarrassed about.
This must have been around the time when we first met. You reminded me so much of my amazing friends up in Aberdeen, people like, I mentioned them on this podcast before, but people like Jane Sudlow, Chris Lovett, Joe Orlando, these fantastic people who were real trailblazers for me, and really inspiring, confident people who knew their shit and knew who they were. And that was exactly how you came across. So even though you were relatively new to that openness, it clearly fit you. You clearly looked good in the outfit.
Oh, well, thank you. I do try and wear it well. Yeah, I think it was kind of pretty instantaneous, to be honest. I mean, now when I meet new people, I will try and find a way to get my HIV status into that conversation really early on. I will make sure that I do it in a way where they're not obliged to say, oh, you're very brave. Oh, I hate that. Or I don't want any of that. I just want them to take it on board, move on.
I mean, you'll also slip in a reference to Patti LuPone as well. So, often it'll come as a double header.
Well, I mean, 20% of all the phrases I use are directly derived from Stephen Sondheim. So, well, it's either that or French and Saunders.
As with every single gay man living in the UK of a certain age.
Absolutely.
It's the new Polari. Now, we're in an incredible situation now, which I still find beautifully unbelievable. And that is this era of U equals U, where you as a man living with HIV, but an undetectable viral load, and me as a man not living with HIV, in a way with an undetectable viral load, we both of us cannot pass on the HIV virus to anybody else. We are effectively exactly the same.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that fantastic?
It's incredible. Like, who would have thought that we would reach this point?
It's something, as I said, we were doing stuff around this at Gay Men Fighting AIDS, 2008, something like that. I don't know. I mean, like a long time before. But I didn't think it was going to be the risk is zero. I thought it was harm reduction. Just as condoms are harm reduction, the risk isn't zero when you use a condom, but it's low. And I thought it was going to be like that. And then as more data came out, the risk is zero. And you're like, how astonishing is that? How wonderful is that? Because there's so few things kind of in medical science where you go zero. But it's such an important message.
Yeah, the level of ignorance about this subject, which is shorthanded to U equals U, the level of ignorance on Grindr and on Scruff and even in conversations, I think is a fucking disgrace.
Yeah, absolutely. And
that's a technical term, by the way.
Yeah, recognize it. This weird thing, and it just shows how normalized stigma still is. Like, kind of people go, oh yeah, I'm on PrEP, and then you say, oh well, I'm HIV positive. Oh well, we can't have sex then. Well, why do you think you're taking PrEP?
Do you remember when I was on PrEP and someone said, are you a PrEP slut? You're disgusting.
And you put it on a t-shirt. I love that.
PrEP slut.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, that's what we do as gay men. We take the terms of abuse that are used against us and we make them our own. That's why we're queer. That's why we wear pink triangles. That's why we embrace our sluttiness and celebrate it. Because every time that you take something that is used against you and you make it into your own armor, it loses its power to hurt you.
You have had an incredible journey. We both of us became sexually active long before combination therapy. Then combination therapy comes along and you have your diagnosis. And then in 2021, you have this incredible landmark moment where you become the first openly HIV positive chair at a major AIDS conference.
It was overdue, really. I mean, if you think back, so like 1983, they established the Denver Principles. So the Denver Principles was nothing about us without us.
And you were the first openly HIV positive chair in 2021.
Yeah. And in 1989, at the 5th International AIDS Conference, which was in Montreal, ACT UP protesters stormed the conference and demanded to be included. And yet it still took until 2021. But I would say that actually in the field of HIV, after those early protests, the researchers and the clinicians and the doctors, they did come on board. They stood with people living with HIV. They joined our protests. They joined our activist movement. I think it has actually helped transform the way medicine is delivered, the way that a lot of healthcare providers think about their relationship with their patients. And the medical science, the innovation we've seen in HIV, that has had an enormous impact on the whole field of medical science, including the reason why we were able to find a vaccine for COVID so quickly was because of a lot of the research which had gone into searching, still as yet unfulfilled, searching for a vaccine against HIV.
What are your concerns about growing older as a man living with HIV?
I think it's really difficult not to be really aware that aging is a privilege, that it's one that has been denied to many people living with HIV, many of my contemporaries from the 80s and 90s. They never got the chance. I know so many people who never Googled anything, never went on Grindr, never knew a world where gay people could marry, because their lives were snuffed out before they got to that as a result of AIDS. And so for me, as someone who has now lived with HIV for 27 years, and has not got AIDS and does not anticipate moving to AIDS in my life, that's amazing. But others aren't so lucky, and still others aren't so lucky, and increasingly, as a result of Trump's cuts to USAID and then cuts which the UK, which was previously one of the biggest funders of international AIDS relief work. We've also cut our budgets, and people are dying in greater numbers this year than they were last year, and that looks set to increase. So as I age with HIV, I just recognize that I'm in a really distinct and privileged position where I feel fairly confident that I will continue to have secure access to treatment for the rest of my life, and that my struggles of aging are going to be similar to the struggles of aging that most people have, irrespective of HIV status.
I'm speaking with the wonderful Matthew Hodson. And Matthew, this is the part of the episode where I like to take us to the peacefulness of the Remembrance Garden in what was the grounds of the London Lighthouse. And this is a space to remember and honour some of the individuals that we have lost. Is there someone you would like to tell us about today who you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'd like to remember someone who I sat in the garden at London Lighthouse with. His name was James Quinlan, and he was a volunteer at Gay Men Fighting AIDS when I was the first admin assistant and then later project manager of what was called the Positive Campaign Group, which was a group of volunteers within Gay Men Fighting AIDS which delivered projects which were targeted at gay men living with HIV. Now James, he was very handsome. He was very brash. He drove like a maniac. I remember him driving me to meetings, and I would just be sitting in the passenger seat, like just holding on to the chair because I just felt like we were going to crash at any moment. The way he took corners, the way he ran lights, it's terrifying. But he was very open about his HIV status. He had periods in his life and in his health where it would have been impossible for him to conceal it entirely. But this was the treatment era, and he had made the decision that he wasn't going to hide it, and we worked together on campaigns about being open about HIV, which was ironic because at the time I wasn't. But he was happy to be that spokesmodel, and he would be on our on our posters wearing his leather trousers and leather jacket and no shirt underneath, revealing luscious hair across his chest. He was very cheeky, very funny. He had the most splendid parties, and he was very loved. He died it must have been 16 years ago, something like that. His body had just taken a beating from early drugs, from HIV, from experiences with AIDS. And yeah, I would just want him to be remembered because he was a very special person.
Now, finally, Matthew, I ask all our guests to round up their episode with a postcard to the world. And this is a request that you distill your decades of experience and advocacy in just one or two short sentences, pieces of advice or truths that you want to share with people listening.
I'd say what you do is important. Don't lose sight of that. If there's a change in the world which you want to see, be a part of that creation.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of HIV The Morning After. My sincere thanks to you, Matthew Hodson. It's been wonderful having you as a guest.
Oh, thank you. It's been an absolute delight, Dan.
If you were moved or informed by what you heard today, please help spread the word. Subscribe to HIV The Morning After and leave a rating and a review. It makes a huge difference in helping others to find it. Your support helps to amplify these experiences. If you'd like to get in touch, suggest a guest, or share your own thoughts, you can email me at hivthemorningafter@gmail.com. And remember, if you encounter HIV stigma in a bar, call it out. If you encounter it at work, call it out. If you encounter it online, call it out. Because if you don't, you're part of the problem. The theme tune is by Paulie Nidu at unstoppablemonsters.com. And many thanks to Murray Lang for his continued support. And thank you for listening. Join me next time for another important conversation on HIV The Morning After. I've been Dan Hall.